Hi friends, tonight we are going to drift very quietly back through time together. So as you settle into your pillow and feel the weight of your blankets around your shoulders, imagine that you are slowly closing not just your eyes, but the door on the present century. And when it opens again, you will find yourself somewhere in the chill and stillness of 19th century America, where Christmas feels smaller, quieter, and somehow more serious than the glittering holiday you know. Before we go all the way there, take a slow breath in, let it out, and if you enjoy these slow journeys into the past, you can gently tap the like button and subscribe, but only if it genuinely makes you happy to support what I do here, because this little corner of the internet is meant to feel like a safe, peaceful room where you can fall asleep to history. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now, because I love to imagine all of you scattered across the world, some in cities, some in tiny villages, all lying in the dark with headphones on, listening to the same quiet story. Now dim the lights. Let the room fall into that soft half-dark that makes every sound a little rounder and every thought a little slower. Feel your body sink gently into the mattress and follow the faint glow of the fireplace in your mind as we step out of our own world and onto a frozen road more than 200 years ago. You are standing at the very edge of 1800s America, and the first thing you notice is the sound beneath your boots, that dry, squeaking crunch of real winter snow, the kind that doesn't slush and splash like city snow, but packs down into hard layers that remember every footprint around you. The land spreads out in long, pale distances, fields of stubble buried in white, dark lines of forest pressing against the horizon, and far, far away, so faint that you have to hold your breath to hear it, there is the slow, careful clop of a horse moving along a frozen road, the sound carrying very clearly through the cold air, as if the century itself has gone quiet to listen. You pull your coat a little tighter, though you quickly realize that in this world your coat is made of wool and homespun fabric. Instead of industrial insulation, you can feel the air sneaking in at the seams, pinching your fingertips, nipping at your nose, and you already sense something important about Christmas in 19th century America. This is not a holiday that comes to you ready-made in boxes and deliveries. This is a season you have to survive and build yourself, out of firewood and flour and the warmth of other people, and you will not get through it without losing the feeling in your toes at least once or twice. But somehow that risk is part of what makes it precious. The sky above you is a soft, heavy grey, the kind that seems to sit low on your shoulders, and the daylight is already thinning even though it is not that late, because winter here does not waste time on long afternoons. Your breath drifts in front of you in pale clouds, and each time you exhale, you feel how raw the air is as it scrapes the back of your throat, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke from somewhere nearby, and beneath that, fainter, the tired, salty smell of animals and the stored scent of hay. You pause for a moment and listen to the silence, and you realize that it is not truly silent at all, but made of small, distant sounds that have room to stretch out the brief, scandalized cluck of a chicken disturbed in its shed, the hollow thud of an axe somewhere out of sight, the single bark of a dog that echoes once off the bare trees and then disappears. There are no cars to hum in the background, no planes to whisper overhead, only the breathing of the land and the creaks of timber and leather as people move slowly through their routines. As you stand there, letting your mind adjust to this slower, heavier world, a very simple, very important fact drifts up like a line of text in the snow. In the early 1800s, Christmas is not even a federal holiday yet. It will not be officially recognized until 1870, and so in this landscape, the day itself can feel like different things depending on where you are standing. In some homes, a quiet religious observance. In others, a welcome excuse for a gathering and a good meal. In others, still almost just another winter day where chores come first and any celebration that squeezes through the cracks is a bonus. Your boots begin to feel stiff in the cold, so you start walking along a narrow track that cuts through the snow toward a distant smudge of smoke. The path is uneven. Your steps leave deep marks, and on either side of you fence posts lean under the weight of drifts, some of them almost swallowed, their tops wearing little white caps. Every few paces the ground rises enough that you can see how far apart the farms lie from one another, each small house and barn standing alone against the whiteness. Little islands of human life separated by fields and woods, and you think about what it means that a simple visit to borrow a cup of sugar might take an hour of trudging, or a sleigh ride through icy wind. As you move closer to the first homestead, you notice small details that only appear when you let your mind slow down. The way the smoke from the chimney does not rise straight up, but drifts sideways as though the sky is gently exhaling. The way a bare apple tree near the house holds a few forgotten, shriveled fruits still clinging to the branches, turned into little red stones by the cold, and the way the snow around the barn is stamped with the busy, nervous patterns of hooves and paws and boots, a record of every living thing that has crossed this little stage since the last snowfall. You pass by the barn first, and the walls are not smooth and uniform like modern siding, but made of long planks and rough boards, some patched with odd pieces of whatever the family had on hand, the texture of hand-sawn wood catching traces of frost. Your gloved hand, when you rest it against the boards, feels that sharp, biting cold that sits just beneath the surface of everything this season touches, and inside you hear the soft shifting of animals in straw, a low, comforting chorus of snorts and shuffles, and the occasional clink of a chain, their breath rising in ghostly puffs toward the rafters. The animals, you realize, are a kind of living calendar and weather vane combined. If they are restless and stamping, the humans know that a storm may be coming, or that a visitor is at the edge of the yard, and if they are quiet and munching, then the day is considered calm, a good day for work, a better day for celebration. And tonight, as the light begins to fade early, they seem content, as if the world has agreed to hold its breath for the holiday. You step away from the barn and toward the house itself, and even before you reach the door you are close enough to see something that makes you smile, though you instantly feel the practicality beneath it. On the small wooden porch, next to a broom and a pair of boots left to dry, someone has placed a few apples and perhaps a small pot or a jar, items that in a warm climate would spoil in a day, but here can sit in the clean, hard air and freeze solid, as if the entire outdoors has become a free icebox. Families sometimes tuck food outside like this, when the root cellar is full or when they simply trust that the cold and a bit of luck will protect their supplies better than any cupboard. You picture, half amused and half sympathetic, a hungry raccoon or a bold farm cat padding up in the night, examining the apples with bright, curious eyes, and deciding whether risking the cold and the human's annoyance is worth a stolen feast. And you understand that in this world, even Christmas treats must be defended from both the weather and the wildlife. The door before you is simple, its paint worn thin where hands have pushed it for years, and as you lay your fingers on the latch you can feel the small gap where cold air leaks through the frame, the house breathing in and out with the wind. When you finally press it open, the hinges complain softly, and a faint wash of warmer air brushes your face, carrying with it the honest smells of 19th century life, wood smoke that has soaked into everything, a hint of cured meat, a touch of damp wool drying near the fire, and underneath all of that the quiet beeswax sweetness of a candle burning somewhere in the next room. You step just inside the threshold and close the door carefully behind you, because in this century every little bit of heat matters, and you feel at once how fragile the warmth is, how it does not fill the house the way modern heating does, but gathers close to the fireplace in a slow, stubborn pool that thins out as you move away. Your toes are grateful even for this shy heat. Your hands tingle as the blood returns, and you instinctively rub them together and hold them toward the embers, as if you have always lived here. For a moment you simply stand in the small front room and look around, letting your eyes adjust to the softer light. The floorboards are bare except for a braided rug near the hearth, made from old scraps of cloth twisted and stitched together, Every color a memory from a worn-out dress or an apron that once worked as hard as the person who wore it. The walls are plain but patched against drafts with pieces of cloth and paper pushed into cracks, and near the window a thin curtain hangs, more for keeping out the wind than for privacy. A reminder that in 1800s winter, fabric is a kind of weapon against the cold. On a low table you see a single candle resting in a simple holder, its flame steady but small, and the wax has dripped down one side into a little frozen waterfall of pale, hardened folds. If you lean close in your imagination, you can smell the gentle sweetness of beeswax, and you realize that for many families this one candle might be the main evening light, asking everyone's eyes to work harder, forcing reading and sewing and writing letters to happen slowly and carefully, not in the blaze of 100 watts, but in this trembling golden circle. You let your hand drift over the cloth-bound book lying near the candle, the cover worn smooth where fingers have opened it over and over again, and you imagine a mother or father sitting exactly where you are standing now, tracing words line by line with a child's small finger, teaching them to read by this very glow, turning each page like a quiet miracle earned at the end of a day filled with hauling water, mending harnesses, and chopping wood. It occurs to you that in this room the difference between ordinary time and Christmas time is not measured in flashing decorations, but in subtle shifts: an extra candle, a slightly sweeter smell from the kitchen, the promise of a special meal, or a tiny gift waiting in a stocking that is really just a carefully mended sock. Above your head the ceiling beams creak as someone walks across the floorboards of the room above, and for a heartbeat you tense, not because you are in danger, but because the house itself speaks in these groans and pops, expanding and shrinking with every change of temperature, a living structure that complains gently as it holds everyone together. You relax as you remember that this is normal here, and that in storms those creaks become a kind of lullaby, reassuring in their familiarity. You notice in one corner near the fireplace a rocking chair angled just so, perfectly positioned to catch as much heat as possible while leaving room for others to stand and warm themselves. And draped over its back is a heavy shawl, the kind that smells like lanolin and smoke and years of use. Perhaps the favorite place of the oldest person in the household, someone who has seen many such winters and many such Christmases, each one similar in its simplicity and yet different in its small, hard-won comforts. As you stand there, your boots leaving little wet marks on the floorboards, you feel the past pressing very gently against your shoulder, not to frighten you but to invite you to look more closely at what Christmas meant in this world, in this year, with this single fireplace, this single candle, this family who has spent an entire growing season chopping wood, preserving food, stitching clothes, and saving tiny luxuries for a day that will look, from a distance, very modest, but will feel to them like a deep exhale of gratitude and survival. And as you take another slow breath in your own dark room, somewhere far in the future, you know the story is just beginning, and that if you step a little further into this house in this century, the holiday will unfold one quiet detail at a time. You take a few quiet steps deeper into the room, and as you move away from the door you feel the air grow just a little warmer, because each pace brings you closer to the heart of the house, which is the fireplace and the small kitchen that clings to it like a younger sibling, and you begin to notice that everything in this home seems to lean subtly toward the source of heat, chairs angled toward it, boots drying near it, a small sleeping cat almost folded into the hearth's shadow, as if trying to become part of the brick. From somewhere just beyond the doorway to your left, you hear the soft, steady rhythm of hands working, a gentle thud of dough meeting wood again and again, and the low murmur of a voice humming an almost tuneless fragment of a hymn, not loud enough to be a performance, just something to keep time with the work. You follow the sound and step into the kitchen, which is really not a separate room at all, but an open space where the fire does double duty, warming bodies and cooking food, and the first thing that strikes you is how much effort is hanging in the air. The scents come in layers, like a slow, careful recipe, Smoke from the logs at the back of the hearth, a salty note from a piece of pork or ham hanging nearby, the faint sweetness of apples that were picked months ago and are now simmering in a pot with spices that had to travel oceans to get here, and underneath it all the earthy comfort of root vegetables, onions and potatoes and carrots waiting their turn in a basket by the wall, each one a small guarantee that winter can be pushed back one more day. You realize that in 1800s America a Christmas meal is less a sudden feast and more a patient assembly of everything the family has been saving, stretching and guarding since the last harvest. Near the table stands a woman with her sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted lightly with flour, and she is working a lump of dough with a calm, practiced motion that you can almost feel in your own hands, pressing the heel of her palm into the soft mass, folding it over, turning it, pressing again, the dough squeaking faintly against the wood with each push. The light from the fire and a single candle throws a warm glow over her hands, and you sense that she has done this on countless evenings, not just for holidays but for ordinary days too, because in this world bread is not just food, it is a daily decision to turn grain into something nourishing and comforting at the cost of time and labor. On a nearby shelf, instead of shiny packages and branded jars, you see ranks of glass and crockery, each one holding something that represents a little victory against decay. Pickled cabbage glowing pink in the low light, cucumbers floating in cloudy brine, dark jars of fruit preserves, labeled only by memory, perhaps pear or plum or berries collected in the brief abundance of summer. You imagine the hot days when those same hands stood here over a boiling pot, stirring and skimming and sealing, thinking about cold nights that felt very far away at the time. And now, on this winter evening, those jars are more than decoration, they are edible savings accounts, opened carefully and sparingly. Your eye catches a small, somewhat charming detail that makes this kitchen feel even more human. Hanging from one of the ceiling beams, wrapped in cloth and tied with twine, is what looks suspiciously like a pie, suspended in the air, as if it were some exotic fruit, and you recall that families sometimes resorted to this simple trick to keep mice from sampling their desserts, raising the precious treat out of reach of tiny paws and teeth, so that it can survive unscathed until the right moment, perhaps tomorrow afternoon when guests come calling, or when the children have finally run out of patience. At the far end of the table, a child sits on a small stool, feet not quite reaching the floor, concentrating hard on peeling a potato with a small knife, the peel falling away in a long curling ribbon that lands in a neat little pile. You watch the way the child's brow furrows with seriousness, and you understand that in this house, on this farm, there is no sharp line between adult work and children's play, especially not at Christmas, because helping in the kitchen, carrying wood, or setting the table is part of the celebration itself, a way of belonging to the day rather than just watching it. You let your fingers trail lightly across the rough surface of the table, feeling the nicks and marks left by years of chopping and kneading, and you picture how different this scene is from a modern holiday kitchen, where many things can be bought at the last minute and tossed into an oven, with the help of timers and lights and printed instructions. Here every dish has a memory attached. The ham remembers the day it was salted and hung, the bread remembers the grain harvest, the apples remember the late summer sun, and all of them are being invited to this one evening, as if it were a family reunion of flavors. Behind you, closer to the hearth, a kettle hangs from an iron arm that can be swung in and out of the direct heat, and from it rises a thin, fragrant steam that smells of herbs dried months before, and stored carefully in little bundles, maybe mint, maybe chamomile, perhaps sassafras, or another plant that someone's grandmother swore would cure a cough. Tea, whether made from precious imported leaves or from local herbs, is not a casual drink here. It is a comfort rationed in small cups, poured into thick mugs with chipped rims, held between chilly fingers, as much for the warmth of the vessel as for the taste. You glance up and see the ceiling beams draped with those bundles of herbs, string-tied bunches of thyme and sage, and maybe some medicinal plants. Their leaves now dull and crispy but still carrying whispers of summer. They hang there like little green ghosts, waiting to leap back into life when dropped into a pot of stew or tea. And they remind you that this Christmas kitchen is not a sudden miracle. It is the slow, careful result of months of watching the sky, counting the jars and hoping that nothing goes wrong with the harvest. As you stand there absorbing all of this, listening to the soft slap of dough and the faint simmer of stew, you notice a row of plain, stitched stockings folded on a chair nearby. Not the bright, elaborate stockings of modern cartoons, but simple tubes of fabric, perhaps made from old shirts or leftover wool, patched in places, the stitches visible up close. When you pick one up in your imagination, you can feel how thin it is, how easily the cold air would slip through it, if worn outside. And you realize that for a child in this house, the idea that such a stocking might hold an orange or a piece of candy or a small carved toy tomorrow morning is almost shocking in its luxury. You can see, without needing to be told, how the Christmas magic here is woven from very small threads, from the promise that there might be just enough sugar to make cookies instead of plain biscuits, that there might be a few moments after chores to sing or tell a story instead of going straight to bed, that someone has found the time to knit a pair of mittens with a little extra care in the pattern, so that warmth itself becomes a wrapped gift. And you begin to sense that in 1800s America, the holiday is less about adding something extravagant to life, and more about pausing just for a night, to enjoy the things they usually treat as ordinary survival. You step back out of the kitchen and into the main room again, and here the decorations, such as they are, reveal themselves slowly as your eyes adjust to the dimness. A small sprig of evergreen tucked behind a cracked plate on the wall, its needles dark and glossy against the faded ceramic, a bit of red ribbon saved from some long-ago package tied around the neck of a simple clay jug, a handful of cranberries strung on thread and looped over a nail near the fireplace, their colour startlingly bright in the muted room. It dawns on you that before the arrival of electric lights and mass-produced ornaments, people had to coax beauty out of whatever the land and their cupboards would surrender. On a peg near the door hangs a thick wool coat, its shoulders dusted with melted snow, and below it stand a pair of heavy boots turned toward the hearth, drying slowly, leaving small damp crescents on the floor. You picture the person who wore them stomping off the snow on the threshold, stamping their feet to bring back circulation, and then stepping into the room with a gust of cold air, bringing with them the last stinging piece of the outside world before Christmas folds the house into itself and shuts the weather out as best it can. The wind outside gives a long, low sigh along the eaves, and you feel the house answer with a soft creak, the windows trembling just enough to let you know that the barrier between in and out is thin, made of hand-cut glass and wooden frames that never quite fit as tightly as anyone would like. Scraps of cloth have been pressed into the worst drafts, and a quilt hangs over the door that leads to the back of the house, not as decoration but as insulation, every patch telling you that fabric in this home is a tool as much as a textile. You walk toward the narrow staircase, its steps polished in the middle by countless feet, and you pause halfway up, resting your hand on the smooth wooden rail, and you let yourself imagine what this house will feel like in the blue-grey hour before dawn, when the children creep down these very steps, hearts pounding with the thrill of forbidden early rising, trying to move quietly but failing, as each tread creaks loudly in the quiet, giving them away to parents who pretend not to notice for a few extra minutes. You see in your mind the way the oldest child will try to look unimpressed, leaning against the banister with an exaggerated sigh, as if stockings filled with an orange, a handful of nuts, maybe a bit of candy and a small toy, are nowhere near as exciting as they secretly feel. You see the youngest bouncing on their toes, eyes huge in the firelight, and you understand that in this house the memory of one orange given at Christmas might remain clear and bright for an entire lifetime, the sharp citrus scent forever tied to the sound of crackling logs and the sight of snow pressed against the window. As the downstairs room settles around you once more, the candle flickers and steadies, the fire sinks into a red, pulsing bed of coals, and the voices from the kitchen drift in as a soft murmur. You begin to feel your own breathing slow to match the rhythm of this quieter century, and you realize that the first part of understanding what Christmas was really like in 1800s America is simply this: accepting how much effort, scarcity, and cold wrap themselves around every small joy, so that even the simplest comfort, a warm room, a full plate, a handmade gift, glowed like a star against the long winter night. You stand there a moment longer, letting that idea settle into you like warmth soaking into chilled fingers, and then, when you are ready, you step back toward the door, knowing that another farm, another home, another variation of this careful, humble holiday waits out there in the snow for you to visit next. You step back outside into the cold, and the door closes behind you with a small wooden sigh, the kind that makes the entire house seem like a living creature settling deeper into its blankets for the night. And instantly the warmth you carried on your skin begins to thin and drift away, replaced by a sharper, cleaner cold that bites at your cheeks and turns each breath into a pale ribbon of frost drifting upward toward the starless sky. The snow under your boots feels different now, firmer, colder, more deliberate, as if the night has stiffened it, and the world around you seems larger than it did before. The fields stretching out in silent white plains, the fences casting faint blue shadows under the thin moonlight, and somewhere far off an owl lifts its voice into the darkness, with a soft, questioning call. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders, even though the fabric feels thin by modern standards, and you begin walking along a narrow path that leads toward a cluster of darker shapes at the edge of the property, shapes that turn into barns and sheds as you approach. The wind moves through the trees in slow, hollow waves, brushing snow from the branches, so that a fine dust of white drifts silently through the air, like powdered stars falling from a sky that has grown too heavy to hold them. As you follow the path, a lantern flickers in the distance, swinging gently from a hook near another farmhouse, its light forming a trembling golden circle around the doorway. You begin to understand how precious this glow is in a world without electric bulbs, how a single flame becomes a beacon across the land, a quiet promise that someone is awake, someone is warm, someone is preparing for the humble magic of the season. When you reach the next homestead, the yard feels freshly disturbed. Bootprints leading to the well, the faint drag of a sled across the snow, animal tracks weaving in and out of the shadows, and as you lay your hand against the barn door you feel the deep, bone-heavy cold of the wood, a cold that has soaked through every inch of the structure. Inside, the animals shift in their stalls, hooves scuffing against straw, and their breath rises in soft, ghost-like plumes, curling upward toward the rafters where bits of hay hang like forgotten ornaments. A detail lifts softly into your mind, the kind you only notice in places like this. Animals in the 1800s were not just companions or tools. They were weather forecasters, mood barometers, and members of the household, and their behavior guided much of the human routine. If a cow lowed uneasily in the night, people rose to check the sky. If the horses shuffled and blew sharply through their nostrils, a storm might be coming. And if all the animals rested quietly, humans relaxed their shoulders a little and carried on. You leave the barn door as you found it and turn toward the house. And as you approach the porch, you run your gloved fingers along the hand-sawn boards of the exterior wall, feeling the uneven ridges and the faint scars of an axe blade that shaped each piece of wood. Tucked into the gaps between the boards you spot scraps of newspaper, wool, and cloth, pressed in tightly to stop drafts from sneaking into the house, a small, ingenious act that families performed with whatever material they had on hand. And you imagine someone discovering a decades-old letter or recipe or scribbled joke when repairing the wall years later. History tucked into insulation. You inhale deeply, catching the scent of something warm drifting from inside, bread perhaps, or stew, or herbs steeping in a kettle. And as you push the door open, a wave of soft orange light spills across your boots, followed by a soundscape so gentle it feels like stepping into a memory. The crackle of fire on logs, the quiet hum of someone working, a distant laugh from another room, and the soft whistle of wind pressing against the shutters, as if trying to listen in. The main living space unfolds before you, compact but full of life, with chairs angled toward the hearth, like worshippers leaning toward a source of warmth. A kettle simmers at the edge of the fire, sending up fragrant curls of steam that smell faintly of chamomile or mint, herbs likely gathered in summer and dried in bunches that now hang from the beams overhead, their faded leaves rustling just slightly as warm air rises from the hearth. A small shelf on the wall catches your attention, holding objects that quietly shape the holiday mood. A worn Bible whose pages have softened from years of turning, a tiny wooden box that might hold keepsakes or sewing needles, a simple carving of a dove perched beside a dried orange slice threaded with string. You lift the orange slice in your imagination and find that faintly, impossibly, it still smells of citrus, a tiny brightness preserved through the dark months. A child rushes past you with the quick, light footsteps of someone accustomed to making their own fun. Their wool stockings sag at the ankles, their cheeks glow red from outdoor play, and in one small hand they clutch a marble or chestnut or some other treasure, chosen simply because it fits nicely into the palm. They disappear around a corner, laughing softly, and you realize that for children in this world entertainment is built from scraps and imagination. Hoops made from barrel pieces, sticks turned into swords, stones polished into marbles, and yet the joy is just as sharp, just as bright as any modern toy. You drift toward the kitchen, drawn by the stronger glow of firelight, and as you step inside you see a woman kneading dough at the table, her arms moving with steady, practiced rhythm. The dough squeaks faintly under her weight, and the warm, yeasty smell that rises from it is almost hypnotic, the kind of scent that makes your shoulders loosen and your breathing deepen. Behind her, a pot of beans simmers gently, and another pot holds root vegetables that will soften into something comforting by supper time. In the low light of the kitchen you spot something that instantly feels like a treasure, a jar of pickled cabbage glowing pinkish gold, illuminated by the flicker of firelight, its colour startling against the muted browns of the room. You imagine the careful slicing, salting, packing, and storing that produced it, and you feel the faint but steady pride that such a jar would bring to a household, knowing that each preserved item is its own form of winter insurance. On a nearby chair stands a pair of boots drying by the fire, sturdy leather boots with soles worn smooth, their toes pointed inward as though resting melted snow beads on the floor beneath them, reflecting the light in tiny droplets, and you see clearly how they must have carried someone across fields and forests earlier today, collecting firewood, fetching water, tending to animals, never idle, even on the eve of a holiday. Somewhere in the far corner of the house a fiddle is being tuned, the notes plucked softly, each one wobbling for a moment before finding clarity, and the sound drifts through the rooms like a shy guest waiting for the right moment to enter. You smile at the thought of music filling this home tonight, because in the 1800s there is no playlist, no radio, no stored soundtrack, only what human hands and breath can produce in the moment, making each song feel like a handmade gift offered to the entire room. You sit on a low bench near the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into your legs through the wood, and you watch the shadows dance across the floorboards, long and graceful, as though even they are part of the household's quiet preparations. And as you let your weight sink into the bench, listening to the small symphony of domestic sounds, you feel the pace of the centuries slow around you again, inviting you deeper into the evening, deeper into the heart of Christmas as it once was, before we had anything but our own hands to make it glow. The fire pops softly, the candle trembles in its holder, and the house seems to lean toward you, as if ready to show you the next part of its winter world. You sit a moment longer on the low bench, feeling the warmth pulsing gently against your shins, like the steady breathing of some old, gentle creature. And when you finally rise, the room seems to shift with you, the shadows stretching and tightening as if guiding your steps toward the doorway that opens into a narrow hall. The air here is cooler, touched by a draft that sneaks along the floorboards, but it carries with it a faint and unmistakable scent: pine, resin, sap, something wild and clean that draws you forward with quiet curiosity. Someone has placed a small lantern on a peg by the back door, its flame casting a trembling halo that paints the hallway in soft gold. You lift it carefully, the metal warm against your fingers, and open the door just enough to slip through. The cold outside greets you immediately, sliding beneath your collar, brushing your face in a way that wakes you without startling you. A reminder that winter in this century is not a season but a presence, one that insists on being acknowledged every time you step into its domain. The snow here lies deeper than before, piling in drifts against the side of the house, and as you make your way along the narrow path, you realize you are following the tracks of someone who walked this same way not long ago. Their footsteps move toward a stand of trees at the edge of the property, and now the faint scent of pine makes sense. This is where families go to gather greenery for the holiday, not because it is fashionable or traditional in the modern sense, but because the winter landscape offers only a few living colors, and evergreens become symbols of resilience and hope, surviving even when the fields and gardens sleep under snow. You follow the trail into the woods, the lantern swinging softly with each step, its light pooling on the snow in warm circles. The sky above is a pale, cloud-soft grey, the kind that makes the world feel hushed, as though the air itself is holding a secret. The forest welcomes you with the subtle sounds of winter, the delicate rustle of birds shifting in their sleep, the occasional crack of a branch surrendering to its icy burden, and your own breath rising in small white plumes. The deeper you go, the more the evergreens tower above you, their branches heavy with frost, their needles stiff and cold when you brush your glove against them. You pause beside a tree whose lower branches fan out like the folds of a skirt, and you let your fingers glide along the prickly tips. Resin clings faintly to your glove, leaving a scent that is both sharp and sweet, the smell of sap locked deep inside wood that refuses to yield to winter. Families in the 1800s came here with intention. You realize not to search for perfection but to gather what the land offered. A full tree for some, just branches for others, maybe a few sprigs for the mantle or a wreath. Before mass-produced ornaments and glittering lights, beauty came directly from nature. Popcorn strings, cranberries threaded with a needle, paper cutouts, bits of tin hammered into stars, candles clipped carefully to branches with a mother's quiet warning to never leave them unattended. You picture children racing through these very woods, pointing at trees and begging, "This one, no, that one's perfect," while their parents shook their heads with patient amusement, knowing that the tree had to be carried home by hand or sled, and that practicality had a louder voice than enthusiasm. And you imagine that laughter echoing between the trunks, warm and bright against the stillness. The tracks before you stop near a modest, sturdy-looking evergreen, not tall, not wide, but full in the middle, and touched with a little wild asymmetry that somehow makes it more charming. You tilt your head, picturing it in the corner of a small parlor lit by a single candle, decorated with whatever scraps of color the household can spare, and you understand exactly why someone chose this one. A man steps forward in your mind's eye, not a ghost, but a figure formed from all the memories of the century. A farmer with frost gathering in his beard, breath curling into the air, an axe glinting faintly as he positions himself beside the trunk. You hear the first chop echo through the trees, a deep, resonant sound that seems to shake loose tiny flurries of snow from the branches above. The rhythm settles in, chop, breath, chop, pause. The tree shivers, leans, and finally falls in a soft, whispering arc, landing on the fresh snow with a muted sigh. You step forward and help lift the fallen tree, the branches brushing against your coat, leaving delicate lines of icy needles. The sled beneath it squeaks as you tug it along the forest floor, and for a moment you appreciate the beautiful simplicity of the task. A tree harvested from the land, brought home by strength and breath, not by store receipts or delivery trucks. The walk back feels somehow shorter, as though the tree itself is eager to reach the warmth of the home, Snowflakes drift down in soft, weightless spirals, settling on the branches and melting instantly on your skin. When you reach the yard again, lanterns glow in the windows like watchful eyes, and the smoke rising from the chimney curls upward in slow, contented tendrils. The door opens before you even knock. Warmth spills out in a tender rush, carrying the scents of fire, spices, bread and wool. Someone takes the tree from your hands while children gather around, whispering excitedly, their cheeks pink from the cold. You step back inside, letting the warmth wrap around you as the tree is carried into the main room and placed carefully in its stand, leaning just slightly to one side, as though nodding politely to the room. Branches unfurl, shaking off the last bits of snow. The scent of pine fills the air immediately, blending with the firelight. Someone laughs softly. Someone wipes their hands on an apron. Someone begins sorting decorations from a wooden box that has been waiting all year for this moment. The room feels fuller, now brighter, warmer, more alive, as though the tree has brought a piece of the forest's endurance into the heart of the home. And as you watch, you feel yourself relaxing even deeper, settling into the quiet magic of a century, where Christmas grew slowly out of effort and land and hands, where every small comfort was earned, and every flicker of light mattered. The evening is far from over, and somewhere in the house the next chapter of the holiday is assembling itself in the gentle rhythm of family, fire, and winter. And when you still ready, we still follow it. You stay beside the tree for a quiet moment, your breath slowing, your shoulders softening as the firelight trembles across the room, and the evergreen smell settles into every corner like a gentle visitor taking its first careful steps into the house. The branches still carry traces of the forest, tiny crystals of frost clinging to the needles, a few stray pieces of bark, the sharp sweet tang of sap warming in the heat, and the contrast between the cold you just came from and the warmth spreading through the room feels almost like stepping back into your own body after drifting somewhere far away. The family begins gathering small boxes and baskets from shelves and cupboards, and you watch as a modest parade of decorations makes its way toward the tree, each item carrying its own quiet story. There is no glitter here, no plastic, no electric twinkle, just simple things shaped by hands over many winters, each one holding memories older than the children, now reaching eagerly for them. A wooden box is opened first, its lid creaking gently, and inside is a collection of homemade ornaments wrapped in cloth scraps. The first to appear is a string of cranberries, their colour a bright ruby that seems to glow in the firelight. Someone explains softly that the cranberries were threaded just yesterday, with a needle that kept snagging on the tough skins, and the children had to sit very still, an impressive act of patience, rewarded now with the way the deep red beads shine against the dark green branches. Next comes a string of popcorn, puffed kernels still faintly smelling of the hearth where they were popped in a small iron pan. The string is uneven, some pieces plump, others tiny, but all held together by a thread that has survived at least 3 Christmases. The family loops it carefully around the middle of the tree, and you notice how the firelight gives the popcorn a warm, buttery glow. From another cloth bundle emerges a set of tin ornaments, thin, hand-cut shapes of stars, circles, and little crescent moons. Their edges are slightly sharp, their surfaces dull with age, and when they catch the light, they flicker in the way only metal touched by firelight can. Someone crafted these by hand long ago, hammering scraps of tin into forms that would reflect even the smallest spark in a dim winter room. When a child hangs one, the ornament turns slowly, sending tiny flashes across the wall like flickering spirits. A small girl reaches into the basket and holds up something precious, a paper angel cut from an old newspaper, yellowed with age, its wings decorated with careful strokes of ink. The paper is fragile, and you can see the faint outline of printed words beneath the drawing, news from some forgotten year that now lives only in this angel's folded arms. She places it gently near the top of the tree, stepping back with a proud smile as if she has just completed a sacred duty. Then come the candles. Real candles, slender white tapers placed into small metal holders that clip onto the branches. Each holder is angled so the wax will drip safely into a tiny cup, but the family knows from experience that these candles cannot be left unattended, and they will only be lit for a few minutes at a time when everyone is gathered and ready. Even unlit, the idea of them fills the room with a kind of anticipation, as though the tree is patiently waiting to reveal its full beauty. As the decorations settle into place, the children begin whispering excitedly, pointing out their favorite ornaments, arguing gently over whether the popcorn should loop one more time or if the tin star shines better on the right than the left. Their voices mingle with the steady hum of the fire, and you feel the room swell with a kind of warmth that is different from heat, something closer to shared breath and memory. A woman drapes a small piece of embroidered cloth across the table near the tree, setting down a wooden bowl filled with fragrant cloves and orange peels drying on a napkin. The smell blooms into the air like a tiny holiday sunrise, sweet, sharp, citrusy. This bowl is both decoration and tradition, a modest attempt to bring brightness into the winter, and you notice that even the fire seems to welcome the scent. A boy appears with a handful of pine cones, some dusted with flour to imitate snow, others tied with scraps of ribbon. He places them carefully beneath the tree, stepping back to admire how they complete the small scene. A moment later, someone places 2 apples there as well, bright against the dark branches, and you remember how expensive fresh fruit can be in winter, and how even these simple apples feel like gifts. When everything is in place, the family steps back, forming a loose circle around the tree. The branches rustle softly, as if settling into their new home, and the tree stands proudly, a little lopsided, a little wild, but undeniably beautiful, an honest reflection of the world that provided it. Someone lights the first candle. The flame catches with a tiny breath of sound, and instantly the entire room changes. The firelight deepens, the shadows soften, and the tree begins to glow from within, every ornament catching some small piece of the light. The branches shine as though touched by warm frost. The children's faces turn golden. The room feels like it is breathing, as though it too has waited for this moment. More candles are lit. 2, 3, 4. And now the tree looks almost like it has a pulse, each flame trembling with the slightest movement of air. This is not the bright flash of electric bulbs, but something gentler, more fragile, and somehow more sacred. A light that demands attention because it can vanish with a breath. The family grows quiet, not from rules or scolding, but from the natural reverence that comes when small beauty flickers in the dark. You stand among them, letting the warmth and the glow and the simplicity sink into your bones, and you realize that this moment reflects the heart of Christmas in 1800s. America, a celebration built not on abundance but on intention, not on spectacle but on care, not on noise, but on the patient weaving of togetherness in a season that can feel long, cold, and lonely without it. The candles burn steadily, and the house holds its breath, ready to show you the next soft flickering chapter when you're ready to follow it. You linger in the soft hush surrounding the candle-lit tree, feeling the warmth of the flames settle into your chest like a slow exhale, and for a moment the room feels suspended outside of time, as though the entire world has paused just long enough for everyone present to remember what tenderness feels like. The candles flicker gently, reflected in dozens of tiny surfaces, tin stars, glossy needles, polished stones, the bright eyes of the youngest child leaning forward to study the way the flames dance. But the candles cannot burn long. Everyone here knows that open flame on an evergreen is both magic and danger. And so after a few minutes the flames are gently blown out, one by one, each extinguished glow replaced by a thin spiral of smoke that rises like a small sigh from the branch. The room dims again, settles again, but somehow feels brighter for having briefly held that trembling light. Now comes a different warmth, the warmth of gathering. Voices begin to rise again, quiet at first, then fuller, more layered, as though the room had taken a deep breath and is ready to speak. Chairs are pulled closer to the hearth. Children sit cross-legged on braided rugs. A few adults settle onto benches or stools, warming their hands on cups of cider or tea. The fire crackles with a playful energy, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny messengers racing into the night. Tonight is not about tasks. Tonight is about stories. An older man clears his throat, the sound soft but instantly commanding the room, and you can sense he has told many of these stories before. Winter tales carried from one generation to the next, repeated often enough that the children know when the funny parts are coming, but still react as though hearing them for the first time. He begins with a story about a Christmas long ago, when a storm buried a neighboring farm under so much snow that the family inside had to dig their way out using fireplace shovels and a borrowed lantern that nearly blew out in the wind. How they emerged blinking into the white world, looking like ghosts made of soot, only to find that their horse had chewed a hole through the barn door overnight and escaped into the yard wearing the remainder of his feed sack like a festive scarf. The children collapse into laughter even though they've clearly heard this story before, and you laugh too, picturing the stubborn horse standing in the snow as though posing for a very confused holiday portrait. As the laughter fades, another story follows, this one quieter, slower. A tale about a widow who lived alone at the far edge of the county, who every winter lit a candle in her window on Christmas Eve, not for visitors, but as a promise to herself that no matter how cold or lonely the night became, she would always keep at least one small light burning. Over the years, travelers lost in winter storms learned to look for that glow, and her light saved more people than she ever knew. When she eventually passed, the neighbors continued the tradition, lighting candles in their windows in her honor each Christmas Eve so that the countryside sparkled with tiny points of hope in the dark. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults smile softly into their cups. The room shifts into a deeper warmth, the kind that comes from shared memory, even if the story isn't yours. A woman near the hearth begins to hum a tune, low and gentle, and soon someone brings forward a small wooden fiddle, worn from years of use, its strings slightly frayed but still singing when touched. The musician tunes it with a few careful plucks, then begins to play a melody that seems to rise from the very beams of the house. Slow, lilting, warm, a tune that feels like walking home through snow while holding a lantern close to your chest. The notes curl through the air like wisps of smoke, climbing up the rafters, weaving around the stockings, settling into every corner of the room. Some of the adults tap their feet. One child leans sleepily against a parent's shoulder. Another sways gently from side to side, eyes half closed as though hypnotized. The music softens further, becoming almost a lullaby, and you feel your own breath sinking with the rhythm. Long, slow inhales followed by softer, slower exhales. This kind of music is not performance, it is atmosphere, a blanket woven of sound and memory. When the melody fades, replaced by the crackling of the fire, the older children begin preparing something they've been waiting for all evening. A round of parlor games. The first is simple and slightly chaotic. A game where one person must sit blindfolded in the center of the room with a wooden spoon while the others sneak up, trying to grab a small object placed in front of them without being tagged by the spoon. The blindfolded person swipes the spoon through the air with wild, dramatic swings that send the younger children shrieking with laughter as they duck out of reach. Even the adults lean forward, amused. The floorboards thump with playful feet. The air fills with giggles, and the room feels briefly like the inside of a snow globe shaken by merriment. After that comes a quieter game. Shadow guessing. Someone holds an object behind a sheet lit from one side by a candle, and everyone else has to guess what the silhouette represents. The shapes are strange and exaggerated. A ladle becomes a dragon. A wool mitten looks suspiciously like a mouse. A pine cone appears as a small hedgehog. Wrong guesses spark laughter. Correct ones earn a tiny cheer. You realize how little these people need to fill an evening with joy. No toys from shops. No screens. No glowing displays. Just imagination, company, and the soft architecture of winter. For a while, the games continue, rising and falling in energy like gentle waves. Eventually, though, the room quiets again, not from tiredness alone, but from that natural moment when night begins to fold inward and the flame of the day burns down into embers. A woman pours warm wassail into cups, a fragrant mixture of apples, cloves, nutmeg, and citrus, and hands them around. The steam curls into your face, and the sweetness coats your throat with warmth that seems to sink all the way to your chest. Someone mentions the old custom of wassailing orchards, people gathering in the cold to sing to their apple trees, blessing them for next year's harvest. A few of the adults smile at the memory of doing this as children, stamping their feet in the snow while shouting good wishes into bare branches. One more story is told, a gentle one this time, about a boy who carved a small wooden whistle for his sister and hid it under her pillow on Christmas Eve, only to discover that she had made him a pouch for his marbles and hidden it in his boots. They found each other's gifts at the same moment and ran laughing through the house, and though neither item was expensive or elaborate, both were treasured for years because each held the time and love of the giver. By now, some of the children have fallen asleep where they sit, their heads heavy on laps and shoulders, their breath slow and even. Someone drapes a shawl over them. Someone else dims the lantern. A log on the fire shifts and collapses inward, sending up a final burst of sparks. The room is dim now, wrapped in quiet. A final hush settles over everyone. Outside, the wind moves softly across the fields, brushing snow into gentle waves. Inside, the warmth deepens, collecting in corners and on sleepy faces. This, you think, might be the purest form of Christmas the world has ever known. A soft night, a warm room, simple joys, and people gathered close against the long winter. And in this stillness, with the candles extinguished and the fire sinking low, the story of Christmas in 1800s, America prepares to drift into its final quiet chapters, waiting only for you to take the next step whenever you're ready. You remain in the hush of that warm room a moment longer, watching as the last sparks in the hearth settle into a soft red glow, the kind that doesn't so much illuminate as breathe, pulsing gently as though the fire has fallen asleep too. The shadows on the walls stretch lazily, settling into long, comfortable shapes, and the murmurs of the adults grow quieter, softened by the weight of the hour and the slow drift of warmth through wool, wood, and bone. Someone rises quietly, so as not to wake the dozing children, and begins lighting a few small lanterns, their glow dim and amber, perfect for guiding feet through the house without disturbing the gentle spell that has settled over everything. You feel the room exhale with them. The gathering is ending, but the night is not over. It is simply changing shape, like snow drifting from the air to the ground. As coats are pulled from pegs and boots tugged back on, you step into the entryway and watch families say their goodbyes in low, affectionate tones. A hand squeezed, a scarf straightened, a small loaf of bread wrapped hurriedly in cloth and pressed into someone's palm for the journey home. There is no rush, no urgency, just the unspoken understanding that the world outside is cold and dark, and kindness must travel with those who brave it. The door opens with a long wooden groan, and the wind enters first, swirling around ankles and skirts, carrying with it a fine scatter of snowflakes that glimmer briefly in the lantern light, before disappearing on the warm floorboards. Guests step into the night one by one, lanterns held aloft like floating stars, their light bobbing gently along the path until they vanish behind a curtain of falling snow. When the last goodbye is whispered and the door closes, the house feels different, quieter, deeper, as though it has inhaled all the warmth, laughter, and breath of the evening, and now wants to hold it close. You feel it too, like stepping into a blanket that still remembers the shape of the person who wore it last. A woman moves through the room, gathering the last of the cups and folding the quilt that had been draped over a sleeping child. A man stirs the fire just once, not to wake it, but to settle it properly for the night. The tree stands in the corner, dark now but still vibrant, its branches casting gentle shadows across the floor, the scent of pine softening the edges of the air. You notice something you hadn't before. A small plate set on a table near the hearth with a few cookies and a carefully placed cup of warm milk. The children must have insisted on leaving it for someone. Perhaps St. Nicholas, perhaps a local variation of the figure, perhaps simply tradition carried from old countries and adapted into this American landscape of snow and wood smoke. The cookies are simple, made of molasses and coarse sugar. The milk steams faintly. Everything about it feels earnest and sweet, a quiet gesture of hope in the stillness of midnight. One by one the lights in the house are dimmed, then extinguished, until only the faintest glow remains from the embers in the hearth. You sense a shift, not sudden but steady, as footsteps move up the staircase, the boards creaking softly in slow, careful rhythm, like the house is nodding in approval at each step. You follow at a respectful distance, imagining the warmth that lingers on the banister from the many hands that gripped it throughout the day. At the top of the stairs the air grows cooler and thinner, touched by the draughts that forever slip beneath door frames in houses of this age. The narrow hallway is lit only by a single candle, and its flame leans slightly to one side, nudged by an invisible breath of winter air. You feel the house settling into its nighttime posture, like a creature curling into itself to conserve warmth. You move toward one of the small bedrooms, drawn by the softest whisper of sound, the even rhythmic breathing of sleeping children. The door is slightly ajar, and when you push it gently open, you find a tiny room with low ceilings and thick quilts piled on narrow beds. The children lie curled in positions only deep sleep can shape, arms tucked under pillows, cheeks flushed with the residue of firelight and laughter. At the foot of each bed sits a humble stocking, not the bright, cartoonish stockings of modern celebrations, but real stockings, long woolen ones patched at the heel and toe, carefully mended throughout the year. Each is slightly lumpy, holding a modest surprise placed quietly while the children slept: an apple, perhaps a few nuts, a small wrapped candy, a carved toy or a rag doll, and maybe one precious orange, glowing faintly even in the dimness like a captured piece of sunlight from the faraway south. You step closer and feel an unexpected warmth in your chest. There is something almost sacred about the simplicity of these gifts, their practicality, their scarcity, their sincerity. Each item required time, labor, saving, or sacrifice. Nothing here is casual. Nothing is wasted. Everything means something. A faint creak on the floorboard reminds you that another adult has entered the room behind you. You turn your head slightly and catch the soft smile on their face as they survey the stockings, pride touching the corners of their mouth. They adjust the edge of a quilt, brush a stray curl from a child's forehead, and then quietly withdraw, leaving the door slightly open so the warmth from the hallway can ease into the room. You follow them back into the hall, where the candle still flickers with that gentle sideways lean. Another room holds two adults already asleep, their shapes outlined beneath a heavy wool blanket, their boots placed neatly beside the bed, as though they might need them in the night if a storm worsens or an animal cries out. The last bedroom is small, little more than a closet, really, but it holds a cradle carved from dark wood, and inside it an infant sleeps with the kind of soft, perfect stillness that makes the world seem almost too delicate to touch. A knitted cap covers the baby's head. A quilt of mismatched fabric squares is tucked to the chin. The cradle gives a tiny creak as the wind brushes against the house's outer wall, but the child does not stir. You step back into the hallway and you realize that the house has fallen completely silent now, except for three sounds: the faint whisper of wind against the eaves, the low sigh of cooling embers in the hearth, and the steady, peaceful breathing of a family safe from the winter. Downstairs, the fire completes its slow collapse into ash, and the room darkens fully, save for the faint glow of moonlight pressing through frosted glass. This is Christmas night in 1800s America, unadorned, unhurried, unbroken by noise or light, held together by nothing more and nothing less than warmth, effort, and quiet love. And somewhere in the softness of this moment, you feel the story preparing to continue, because morning always follows, even in the longest winter. The night settles deeper around the house, wrapping it in a stillness so complete that even the wind seems to move more slowly, as though respecting the sleep of those inside. Frost creeps along the window panes in delicate branching patterns, tiny frozen ferns that form silently in the dark, catching the pale blue shimmer of moonlight with each subtle shift of the clouds outside. The snow beyond the glass has softened into a smooth, glowing sheet, undisturbed, except for the winding tracks left earlier in the evening by families returning home. Inside, the house breathes in a long, slow rhythm. Wood cools, ash settles. The last curls of warmth drift upward into the rafters and fade. For a while, nothing changes. Nothing needs to. But then, quietly, almost shyly, the first hint of morning begins to stir. It starts with a faint sharpening of the air. Not colder, not warmer, just different, like the subtle tightening of a bowstring before the note is played. The night sky beyond the windows shifts from deep blue to a fragile grey, a colour so thin that it might dissolve if you breathed on it. The horizon lightens a touch. The moon weakens, and far away at the edge of the fields, a rooster shakes out his feathers and sends up a call that seems far too bold for the fragile hour. Inside the house, one child moves, just a little, a quiet roll onto their side, a leg kicking gently against a quilt. Then another child stirs, mumbling something soft and dream-heavy. The adults remain motionless, years of habit teaching them how to sleep through early rustlings. But children have no such discipline on Christmas morning, and even before their eyes open, excitement begins to rise inside them like warm air lifting from a hearth. Somewhere downstairs, the embers glow faintly, brightening for an instant as a gust of wind snakes down the chimney. That tiny pulse of reddish gold reaches the stairs, touches the banister, and creeps across the floorboards like a silent invitation. And that is all it takes. A small gasp breaks the quiet, sharp, surprised, delighted, and then the soft thump of feet hitting the rug. A child sits up, hair tousled, cheeks still puffed from sleep, eyes straining toward the window where the faintest grey light promises something special. They lean over the edge of the bed and see the stocking, full now, heavier than it was the night before, and their breath catches in a sound that could wake even the deepest sleeper. But they do not shout. Not yet. Children in this century know instinctively how to savour a sacred moment. The second child sits up too, rubbing eyes with fists, blinking slowly, as though confirming that, yes, this is really morning, and yes, the stocking is real, and yes, Christmas Day has finally arrived. A grin spreads across their face, small and quiet and perfect. In the hallway, the cold creeps beneath the doors. The boards creak faintly as the children slip out of bed, feet landing softly, their woolen nightclothes hanging loose around their ankles. They tiptoe across the room, holding their breath as they lift the stockings, one by one, feeling the surprising weight of the gifts inside. They exchange a look, an unspoken agreement, and step carefully into the hall. The boards beneath them groan gently, but not loud enough to rouse the adults. Not yet. Downstairs they can smell something faint but promising, the lingering sweetness of last night's cider, the ghost of molasses cookies, and the richer, deeper aroma of wood smoke that clings to everything in winter. The first step of the staircase is the dangerous one, the loud one, the one every child in every century knows they must negotiate with the skill of a thief. The oldest child tests it with one toe, barely touching it, then shifts all their weight to the banister and slides down as silently as possible. The step complains anyway, just a tiny whine, but in the hush of dawn it sounds like a crack of thunder. Both children freeze. Silence. Stillness. Then, hearing nothing from behind the bedroom doors, they continue their descent, slow, careful, suspended between fear of waking the adults and the bursting need to see what awaits them by the fire. At the bottom of the stairs, the world opens. The parlour lies bathed in the faint light of morning, soft blue strokes brushing across the floorboards. The tree stands tall and patient, unlit, but beautiful in its quiet dignity. The ornaments, tin, paper, cranberry, popcorn, glow faintly like sleeping stars, and beneath them, arranged neatly, as though placed with devotion rather than habit, sit the presents. Not many, not large, but perfect. A small wrapped bundle that smells faintly of cinnamon, a carved wooden figure wrapped in cloth, a jar of jam tied with a scrap of ribbon, two knitted mittens that clearly do not match, yet clearly belong together, and one bright orange sitting in a wooden bowl, gleaming like a treasure pulled from a distant land, because in truth it is. The children approach with reverence, sinking to the floor where the fire once roared, now just ash and faint warmth, and they stare at the gifts as though looking into the heart of winter itself. The older child unfolds the cloth around a small wooden whistle, carved by someone with patient hands. They lift it to their lips and blow gently. The tiniest note escapes, soft and shy, like a bird waking in the rafters. The younger child unwraps a length of yarn, revealing a doll stitched with uneven but loving care. The doll's face is simple, two blue thread eyes and a mouth shaped in a quiet smile. The child presses it to their chest, rocking gently as though instinctively understanding every stitch was placed by someone who wanted them warm and happy. For a moment no one speaks. No one needs to. Upstairs an adult stirs. A cough, a shifting of blankets. Then footsteps begin, slow but steady, moving toward the stairs. The children glance up, their faces brighten. The morning is beginning. You step back slightly, letting the scene expand, letting the warmth gather, letting the light grow. Soon the kitchen will awaken with the scent of bread warming on the hearth. Soon the adults will come down in wool robes, smiling sleepily, offering hugs and thick woolen socks. Soon breakfast will fill the plates, simple but hearty, meant to push back the cold for the long day ahead. Soon there will be laughter, chores shared lightly, visits from neighbours, hymns sung softly by the fire. Soon the world will stir fully into Christmas. But for now, for this fragile, luminous moment, you stand in the doorway and watch as morning enters gently, touching everything with a grace only winter can offer, reminding you that joy does not need noise, and magic does not need spectacle. In a century where even the smallest gift feels like a sunrise, Christmas morning in the 1800s unfolds slowly, like a page turning itself in the soft cold, and as the adults descend the narrow staircase with sleep still clinging to their faces and warmth still trapped inside their woolen robes, the children rush toward them with the quiet excitement of a world where joy arrives in small, meaningful portions, and the parents smile in that gentle, tired way that speaks of late nights, early mornings, and a lifetime of understanding how precious these simple moments truly are, all while the faint grey light streaming through the frosted windows grows brighter and more defined, promising a day that will be both ordinary in its chores and extraordinary in its spirit. The father stands first beside the hearth, adding a few pieces of wood with practiced motions, coaxing the embers into a living fire that crackles with the scent of pine and warm smoke. And as the room brightens with its glow, the mother gathers the children close, inspecting mittens and wool stockings, brushing stray bits of ash from their sleeves, her voice soft and affectionate, reminding them to thank one another properly for the small handmade gifts they've been given, because here gratitude is as essential to Christmas as the fire itself, and each knitted mitten, each carved toy, each carefully wrapped apple represents hours of someone's labor gently transformed into comfort. Breakfast begins with the quiet clatter of pottery bowls, and the warm smell of porridge thickened with a spoonful of molasses saved for this exact morning, and the children eat with a seriousness that mixes hunger with pride, for even they know that food in winter is a reward earned across many difficult months. And as steam rises from their bowls, curling in faint golden threads toward the rafters, the parents exchange a glance that holds both relief and tenderness, silently grateful that the cellar still has enough root vegetables, that the salted pork has not spoiled, that the family has been kept safe through another cold night. When the meal is finished, the mother layers herself in a shawl and begins shaping dough for the special Christmas loaf. her hands moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm that fills the kitchen with the faint sweetness of yeast and flour. And the father prepares to step into the snow, pulling on his heavy boots with the resigned acceptance of someone who knows that holidays do not excuse the relentless needs of animals. So he opens the door to a burst of cold air that carries the sharp scent of frost and distant wood smoke, and he trudges toward the barn with a lantern swinging from his gloved hand, leaving behind a trail of footprints that look almost blue in the pale morning light. Inside the barn, the animals greet him with soft snorts and shifting hooves, their breath rising in ghostly clouds that catch the lantern's glow, and as he lays out fresh hay and checks the water troughs, he feels a deep grounding sense of continuity. Because tending to these creatures on Christmas Day is no burden but rather a reminder that life goes on even in celebration, and the rhythm of caring for the land and its animals is itself a kind of prayer whispered into the cold. Back in the house, the mother wipes flour from her hands and pulls down a box from a high shelf, revealing the few cherished items reserved for Christmas Day. A small tin mold in the shape of a star, a twist of precious spices saved for only this one morning, a scrap of ribbon kept from her own childhood, and she sets them on the table with a reverence that turns the kitchen into a place of quiet ceremony, where even the simplest ingredients, molasses, cider, dried apples, seem to glow with significance. The children, wrapped in their warmest coats and scarves, step outside to collect more greenery for decoration, their boots sinking into the untouched snow as they wander to the edge of the property where evergreen branches glisten under the soft winter sun, and as they gather a few sprigs of holly and pine, their laughter rises in bright bursts that pierce the morning silence like chimes blown by the wind, filling the cold air with a joy so innocent and fleeting that it feels almost like something alive. When they return, cheeks flushed pink and arms full of branches dusted with frost, the house seems to warm instantly from their energy, and the mother arranges the greenery above the doorway, weaving it with a ribbon until the small decoration looks like a promise of life in the heart of winter, while the children drag chairs toward the window to watch for neighbors who might appear through the swirling snow later in the day, carrying small gifts or warm cider, or simply stories to share. The father returns at last from the barn, stamping snow from his boots and rubbing his hands together until the warmth of the hearth finds him, and he settles into his chair with a sigh that feels equal parts exhaustion and contentment, the kind of sigh that belongs to men who have spent their whole lives negotiating with the winter and have learned to appreciate any moment of peace it allows. Outside, the sun lifts through a thin veil of clouds, turning the snow into a soft, glowing blanket that stretches across the fields like a page waiting to be written. And inside the house the fire crackles, the bread rises, the room fills slowly with the scents of cinnamon and apple and wood smoke, and everything about this Christmas morning feels both fragile and enduring, a reminder that the holiday here is not an event but a breath, not a performance but a feeling, woven from labor, warmth, patience, and the shared hope that spring will come again. As the morning stretches into the pale golden calm of late daylight, the entire homestead begins to feel as though it has taken one long deep breath, and the family moves through this softened world with an unhurried grace, performing familiar rituals that shape the meaning of Christmas more fully than any grand gesture ever could. Because in 1800s America the holiday grows not from spectacle but from repetition, from work done with a softened heart, and from the small, rhythmic motions of people who understand that celebration is woven directly into the fabric of daily life. The mother checks on the rising loaf, lifting the cloth with a gentleness usually reserved for a sleeping infant, and the warm, yeasty aroma that escapes fills the kitchen with a feeling so comforting that even the shadows on the walls seem to lean closer, drawn by that quiet promise of nourishment. She sprinkles a little molasses across the top, with a practiced arc of her wrist, knowing precisely how much will create a sweetness that feels special, but not extravagant, because extravagance here is measured in half teaspoons and careful restraint. Meanwhile, the father sharpens a small carving knife by the hearth, his motions slow and methodical, not because the blade needs to be perfect, but but because he believes the day deserves care. And as he listens to the soft thuds of the children arranging their small treasures beneath the tree, a faint smile forms at the corners of his mouth, the kind that comes from seeing his own childhood reflected, slightly altered in the next generation, proof that tradition is simply memory passed forward with tenderness. The house continues to fill with layered scents: baking bread, simmering apples, dried herbs warming in a small pan near the fire, and each aroma blends into something that feels like a quiet celebration, a sensory tapestry of warmth against the cold morning just outside the thin window panes. Even the room itself seems to take on a slight shimmer as sunlight pushes through frost-laced glass, catching on floating motes of flour that drift lazily like tiny snowflakes spinning in the hearth's glow. By midday, the family prepares for the cherished, modest feast that anchors Christmas Day, each person contributing something shaped by their own small skill. The older child carefully polishes the wooden bowls until they gleam faintly in the firelight. The younger one arranges pine cones on the mantel with a seriousness that borders on reverence, and the mother stirs the pot of spiced apples, while humming a tune that belonged to her grandmother, a melody older than the nation itself, threading the past and present together in one soft, low vibration. The father steps outside once more, his boots crunching into the snow with a deep, satisfying sound, and he crosses the yard to fetch a small barrel of cider set aside for the holiday, the cold air biting his lungs as he moves, but also sharpening every detail around him. The distant silhouettes of trees painted in white, the crispness of the chimney smoke rising straight into the sky, the faint glitter of sunbeams reflecting off ice caught in the fence rails, each moment reminding him of how the land gives and demands in equal measure. When he returns indoors, the warmth envelops him instantly, and he sets the cider near the fire to take the chill off, watching the liquid shimmer in the jug as it warms, carrying the faint scent of fermented apples and distant autumn orchards that feel impossibly far from this frozen world. He settles again into his chair, stretching out his legs and letting the heat from the hearth soak slowly through his boots and into his bones. The family gathers around the table as the bread is finally removed from the hearth, steam rising in slow, elegant curls that dissolve into the air, and as the mother slices the loaf, the knife crackles through the crust with a sound that feels almost ceremonial, a crisp exhale of hard work transformed into nourishment, and she places each slice with deliberate generosity onto waiting plates, beside the apples, root vegetables, and small cuts of meat, carefully rationed for this single special meal. They bow their heads, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude shaped through hardship, and the silence that follows the brief prayer is warm, thick, and full of meaning, as though every person at the table understands that this meal, simple as it is, carries the entire season in its flavors. The smoke of the fire that warmed them during long winter nights, the memory of fields ploughed under summer sun, the labor of preserving food in autumn, and the quiet devotion that sustains families through every storm the year brings. As they eat, conversation flows softly, punctuated by little bursts of laughter. The clink of pottery spoons, the crackle of logs shifting in the fireplace, and the children's delighted whispers as they describe the gifts they found in their stockings, their voices weaving into the ambient calm of the house in a way that feels almost musical, like the gentle rhythm of a lullaby, woven through the slow unfolding of Christmas Day. When the meal ends, no one rushes to clear the table, for the day is not measured in tasks accomplished, but in moments savoured, and so they sit together a while longer, warmed by food, fire, and each other, letting the quiet stretch wide and soft around them like a blanket, until the father finally rises, glancing toward the window where snow begins to fall again in slow drifting patterns that promise another layer of winter solitude and beauty. And as the afternoon deepens, carrying them toward the small rituals and neighborly visits that await, you remain in the warm glow of that moment, sensing that Christmas in 1800s America is not a single celebration but a long, gentle weaving of light, effort, gratitude, and togetherness, each thread carrying the weight of a world where nothing comes easily, and therefore everything, even the simplest thing, feels like a blessing. You step with them into the lengthening afternoon as the house exhales its warmth into the soft blue light outside, and the snow begins to fall again in slow drifting curtains, each flake turning lazily as if undecided about where to land, and the entire homestead feels wrapped inside a quiet cocoon where nothing sharp or hurried can intrude, because Christmas in the 1800s is not a day of rushing, but a spacious unfolding hush in which everything seems to glow a little from within. The father and children ready the small family sleigh, brushing off the thin layer of new snow from the wooden seat, hitching the horse with calm, gentle hands, and the animal shakes its mane, sending a scatter of icy crystals into the air, where they catch the fading light like flecks of amber. The mother pulls her shawl tighter and steps into the sleigh, with practiced grace, settling herself as the others climb in beside her, their breaths rising in clouds that vanish almost immediately into the pale winter sky. The horse sets off at a slow, steady pace, hooves crunching into the fresh blanket of snow, pulling them along the narrow road between farms, and the world becomes a blur of white hills, dark tree trunks, and chimney smoke curling upward in quiet spirals that mark each distant home like small lanterns placed along the horizon. The sleigh runners whisper across the snow, the bells attached to the harness ring softly with each step, and the sound seems to carry an entire century's worth of longing and comfort. As they travel, they pass neighbours also out for Christmas visits, some on foot, wrapped tightly in coats, some in their own sleighs with children waving from beneath blankets, and the greetings are simple but heartfelt, exchanged with the warmth of people who rely on one another not just in celebration but through storms, illness, harvests, and all the quiet struggles adulthood never announces. When they reach the next homestead, the smell of wood smoke and baking drifts across the yard, and the door opens before they even knock. Because in this era Christmas visitors are expected the way winter expects snow, and they are ushered inside with smiles, placed near the fire, and offered warm cider, gingerbread, and that rare treat, a slice of preserved fruit saved since autumn. Voices overlap gently in conversation, talk of weather, of livestock, of small community stories, of children growing faster than their parents can admit. A fiddle leans against a chair in the corner, and someone eventually picks it up, coaxing out a slow, warm melody that winds through the crowded room like a peaceful stream, and people hum along without thinking, letting the notes rest on their tongues like something familiar and comforting. By the time they leave, darkness has begun to settle, turning the snow into a pale, glowing sheet under the early stars. The sleigh glides homeward through the dusk, and the children lean their heads against their parents' shoulders, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's steps and the crisp bite of night air that feels softer when you have a warm home waiting at the other end of the road. When they reach their house, the windows glow with firelight, a small beacon against the night, and stepping inside feels like returning to a deeper, quieter heartbeat, one made of crackling logs, simmering apples, and the faint rustle of the tree's branches shifting in the warmth as though it, too, is settling into its second evening indoors. The family gathers one last time around the hearth, the fire rising with a gentle roar as the father feeds it a split log, and the mother hands out blankets thick with lanolin and years of winter use. The children lie on the braided rug, tracing shapes in the flickering glow, their eyes softening with that drifting heaviness that always comes after a long day touched by excitement and cold air. Someone begins to hum, very softly at first, a carol carried across oceans and generations, a melody older than these walls, older than the country, older even than the traditions that shaped this fragile, tender moment, and slowly the others join in, their voices blending into a low, steady harmony that seems to warm the room as much as the fire itself. The hymn rises, floats, lingers, then fades, leaving behind a stillness so complete it feels like the whole world has paused to listen. The children fall asleep where they lie. The embers glow in a slow, pulsing rhythm. The house creaks as the cold settles around it once more, and outside the sky deepens into a velvet darkness touched with stars, each one flickering like a distant lantern guiding winter travelers home. And as you stand at the edge of this quiet room, watching the family drift into rest, you feel something gentle and enduring settle over you. A recognition that Christmas in the 1800s was not about grandeur or abundance, but about the fragile weaving of warmth against the vastness of winter, about the power of small efforts held together by love, and about the way even the simplest shared meal or candle flame could feel like a miracle in a world where life was hard and joy had to be earned stitch by stitch. The fire sinks lower, the house exhales once more, the snow continues its silent descent, and the day ends exactly as it should, wrapped not in noise but in peace, not in spectacle but in gratitude, not in brightness but in the soft, steady glow of a family who has made warmth out of almost nothing and found, in that humbleness, the true shape of Christmas.